Hello, David.
Hello, Nadira.
Our next question is, what is the life cycle of a risk?
Yes, risks go through various stages, and part of the risk register and the risk review that we talked about earlier is to record the current status of a risk. So it will be helpful to have a set of standard status values that we could follow during the progress of a risk, during the life cycle of a risk, we might say. So every risk starts by being unknown. So I guess the kind of first status, the default status of a risk is unknown, but that doesn't help us. When we think we found a risk, our first status should be draft, because we need to confirm whether it really is a risk or not. So very often in workshops and in checklists and so on, people come up with something, oh, I think this might be a risk. And if we just took it forward into the process, we might find we're wasting our time. It's not really a risk. Maybe it's a problem or an issue, or maybe it's a risk that we've already identified somewhere else, or maybe it's something which is dealt with through a standard procedure that they're not aware of. So you have a draft risk, which we then need to review and validate. If we validate the risk as being valid, the draft risk, then it takes an active status. This is now an active risk which we have to manage. If we try and validate it and find it's not valid, either it's not a risk, it's a problem, or it's one that's already been identified, then we delete it. So it's rejected. Yes. You have a risk which is rejected. So the first status is draft, then it's either rejected or active. Yes. Every active risk needs to be assessed and managed. And so what we do is go through the assessment process and then plan our responses. Our first response strategy that we mentioned earlier on is escalate. We might find that this risk is actually nothing to do with our objectives. It belongs to somebody else. If I'm in a project and it affects the program, then I should escalate it to the program manager. If I'm in one department and it affects another department, I escalate it across to the other department. So another status value, we record this in the risk register. We identified it. It was active. Then we decided to escalate it to this person. And that should be recorded as the final destination of that particular risk. But then if we don't escalate it, it's ours, and we have to manage it. So we design and plan responses. It might be that as we're working on a risk, it becomes no longer valid. So it might be that we have a risk that affects a particular phase of our project, say the design phase, and it can only affect this phase. And then we come to the end of the design phase, and the risk never happened. Yes. So it's past its sell-by date, if you like. It's expired. So there was a period when it could have happened, and it didn't happen, so the status of that risk is now expired. It's not deleted, it's not rejected, it's expired. If we record it to say we did find it, but for some reason it didn't happen. Okay? Another possibility is that we manage the risk away, and then we implemented our risk responses, and then it was dealt with, and then the risk is closed. So we have in our risk register, it was a draft risk, we accepted it, it became active, we dealt with it, and now it's closed. Yes. And that means that the risk can no longer occur, it's gone away. Another possibility is that the risk actually happens. So the bad thing for the threat or the good thing for the opportunity. And so we have a final status value of occurred. So you have an unknown risk which becomes a draft. We validate it, it's either rejected or becomes active. Yes. If it's active and belongs to someone else, we escalate it, so the status is escalated. If it passes by the time when it could happen, it expires, so we have an expired risk. Or we have a closed risk that we've managed, or an occurred risk that actually happened. And then there's one final status after occurred. If a threat occurs, it becomes a problem. Yes. So the final status of a threat could be, it turns into a problem. An opportunity, if it occurs, turns into a benefit, into a saving. Yes. So the final status of an opportunity could be, if it occurs, a benefit. Yeah. So in terms of the life cycle, unknown, draft, rejected or active. From active, it's either expired or escalated, or closed or occurred. Yeah. And then the occurred ones become benefits or problems.
Yes.
And these things are monitored and recorded in the risk register.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much, David. It was good to have you with us today.
It's a pleasure.